Psychology myths about your rotting digital brain are everywhere. Doom scrolling supposedly turns you into a dopamine-fried zombie with less focus than a goldfish. But what if the entire panic is built on viral misinformation? Every headline screams that each notification sizzles your neurons, that your phone hits your brain like microdoses of cocaine, and that Gen Z is melting into Silicon Valley's experiment of mass addiction. Parents panic, teens get labeled as lab rats, and the internet insists your attention span is evaporating. But here, as the plot twist almost nobody talks about, a huge chunk of these claims rests on shaky science, exaggerated findings, and psychology myths that researchers have been quietly dismantling for years. Let's hit the biggest fear first, the claim that fuels every dramatic wellness reel. Social media supposedly creates dopamine addiction identical to heroin, cocaine, or casino slot machines. This idea gets tossed around so casually it's treated as fact, repeated by influencers, documentaries, and yes, even professionals who should definitely know better. The story sounds airtight. You get a like, your reward system lights up, dopamine floods in, and boom. Your brain gets hijacked by evil tech companies engineering your downfall. Terrifying? Absolutely. Scientific? Not even close. Here's the twist. Dopamine isn't a pleasure chemical, and the tiny releases triggered by social media don't resemble drug-induced addiction at all. Dopamine spikes when you eat, talk to a friend, pet a dog, finish a task, basically any time you do anything remotely rewarding. If dopamine release equals addiction, then congratulations, you're addicted to sandwiches, conversations, and existing. Real addiction involves massive dopamine surges, escalating tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, and life-wrecking consequences. Most social media users experience none of these. What people label as addiction is usually just habit formation, overstimulation, or poor boundaries, very human, very normal, and very fixable. Researchers studying this long-term found something even more surprising. When they tracked the same people for years, measuring both their social media habits and their mental health, the terrifying narrative collapsed. One gold standard Norwegian study followed 800 kids from age 10 to 16 using clinical interviews and behavioral tracking. The results: more posting, liking, or scrolling did not predict later depression or anxiety. And kids who did develop depression or anxiety didn't suddenly use more social media. The assumed link simply wasn't there once the data was analyzed properly. Why the misunderstanding? It's because most scary studies measure everything at one time point. Heavy users report more symptoms. Researchers call it a correlation, and the media spins it into causation. But correlation is not causation, and in many cases, it's just as plausible that people already struggling turn to social media for comfort, distraction, or community. When you look at high-quality longitudinal studies, the results are consistent. Social media isn't a universal mental health time bomb. It can be harmful for some people in specific contexts, neutral or beneficial for others, and deeply dependent on personality, content type, and offline life. The reality is far more nuanced than simple screen time equals doom. Now, let us tackle the meme-level myth that refuses to die. Humans now have an 8-second attention span, supposedly shorter than a goldfish. This fact came from a Microsoft report spread like wildfire and was weaponized in countless presentations to declare that smartphones destroyed our ability to focus. There's one major issue. It's completely fabricated, and the goldfish comparison. Also fake. Fish are actually used in neuroscience research because they have strong learning and memory capabilities. The goldfish comparison has no scientific basis whatsoever. And the human attention span statistic is equally bogus because attention is not a single measurable thing that can be reduced to seconds. Attention is multifaceted, involving different types like sustained attention, selective attention, divided attention, and alternating attention, each serving different functions and measured in completely different ways. The idea that your attention span is a fixed number that can be compared across species and activities is a fundamental misunderstanding of how attention works in cognitive psychology. Studies that actually measure specific attention tasks over decades have found no evidence that human attention capabilities are declining, and, in fact, some measures show improvements as people adapt to information-rich environments. What has changed is how we choose to deploy our attention in environments designed to offer constant stimulation. But choosing to switch tasks frequently is not the same as being unable to focus when needed. Here's the twist almost everyone gets wrong. When articles warn that social media shrinks your brain or rewires your neural pathways through something called neuroplasticity, they're describing a completely normal process and framing it as brain damage. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to change and adapt throughout your entire life, forming new connections and pruning unused ones based on your experiences. This is how you learn languages, develop skills, recover from injuries, and adapt to every new environment you encounter. Your brain is always changing, always rewiring, and that's not a bug. It's the feature that makes human learning and adaptation possible. Yes, heavy social media use changes your brain, but so does learning to play piano, becoming a taxi driver, practicing meditation, or spending years in school. The brain changes associated with social media use are not inherently harmful. They're your brain becoming more efficient at the tasks you repeatedly perform. When researchers talk about neural pruning making reward pathways faster, they're describing optimization, not destruction. The scary framing implies that these changes are permanent damage, but neuroplasticity works in both directions, meaning your brain will adapt differently if you change your habits. The real question isn't whether social media changes your brain, it's whether those changes interfere with your goals and well-being, and that answer varies dramatically from person to person. The reason these myths spread so effectively isn't because the evidence supports them. It's because they fit a compelling narrative about technology corrupting human nature. Every generation faces moral panic about new media, from novels rotting young women's in the 1800s to television destroying children's imaginations in the 1950s. Social media is just the latest target, and the psychological myths get traction because they offer simple explanations for complex problems, give people something to blame for societal issues, and provide easy solutions like digital detoxes and screen time limits. But the actual science reveals something far more nuanced and far less catastrophic than the viral myths suggest. Your brain is not being hijacked, destroyed, or fundamentally altered by scrolling through apps. What's really happening is that you're using a powerful tool that, like any tool, can be used well or poorly depending on context, intention, and individual circumstances. The problem isn't dopamine addiction or goldfish-level attention or brain damage. The problem is that these myths distract us from the real issues worth discussing: how social media business models prioritize engagement over well-being, how algorithmic content curation shapes information access, how digital spaces can amplify harassment and misinformation, and how we can develop healthier relationships with technology without falling for pseudo-scientific panic. The truth is less viral than the myths, but it's far more useful. Your brain is resilient, adaptable, and not nearly as fragile as the fearmongers want you to believe. What myth should I break down next?